Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Rob, and welcome to the first episode of Phrasing, a new show where I paint a single image based on whatever idea one sentence gives me. So in this case, the sentence, as you saw in the intro crawl, was Caoimhe knew things would never be the same. Yes, it's a Gaelic name, and I know you were probably struggling to try and figure out how to pronounce that. I did too for quite some time. So for this painting, I figured that I would draw a UFO invasion, something very impending, something looming on the horizon. And I wanted something to be very epic. I wanted it to feel movie-like, a sort of callback to Independence Day. You know, that kind of scale of an invasion, something that is truly grand, sweeping, and epic. But already this composition is giving me a ton of problems. Trying to capture both the city and the UFO and the character all in the same shot, and giving enough space for each to provide some high level of detail, a little more than a silhouette, was very challenging, especially with this widescreen canvas setup. I could have made it a taller canvas, but then it loses this cinematic feel, so I was fighting against the canvas size and the composition just from the start. I also felt as if I was over designing the UFO. I mean, it was there's just too many bits and pieces, and it's already obfuscated by clouds, so it's becoming very difficult to try and balance and provide form and give the viewer enough information to really understand what's happening. So I'm trying to clean up a few of the bits and pieces, add areas of rest, try and calm down a bit of the detail, help drive some of the attention back to the key points in the image. And I thought that maybe adding a light to the UFO could fix it. But as I kept rendering, the more I started to realize, no, this is simply not going to work. So what do? When our reach exceeds our grasp? Well, we let go. At this point, I've spent maybe an hour and a half on it, but it's just not working. So fill the layer with white and start over. So now I'm going back to the simplest expression of the idea. So what do I want? I want a woman, ostensibly named Caoimhe, looking at a UFO who is invading, who is starting an invasion. So, okay, the first thing I'll do then is work out a very simple perspective with all of my vanishing points leading toward the UFO's point of interaction with the world. And I want to ensure that I'm giving enough detail and enough attention to the character, so I render that first. She's in the foreground, completely isolated. This time I'm making sure that instead of trying to blend the character in with the environment, making her fit perfectly, I'm separating her out. She's going to be my foreground element. The idea is to maintain that adequate relationship of background, midground, and foreground. So now that I've established my character in the foreground, painting out a landscape. Landscapes are the simplest things that you could possibly do to indicate distance over space. The nice rolling hills provide an easy reference for landmarks receding into the distance. So at the farthest element, you've got items with very moderate contrast, and they blend very well with the overall value of the environment. That gives it the idea that this is the furthest point. And then as you come closer to your foreground, you increase the contrast and you lower the value. This is a byproduct of atmospheric scattering, of atmospheric hazing. So now that I've got my three hills, easily establish depth in the scene, I'm simply rendering in details to make it feel more realistic, more like an actual scene. At this point, I've taken it all the way back to the simplest expression of the overall brief as I possibly could. I'm providing houses so that there's an interaction point for the UFO with some element of the background, because otherwise it would just be floating in space and still difficult to gauge where exactly it is, what exactly it's doing, which was a problem with the initial sketch that I created. It's very hard to get a sense of scale for very large things if you provide no actual reference point and you provide no actual interaction with something that's human scaled, something that we can understand intuitively just by looking at it. So in this case we have houses, and though houses can vary in size, we still roughly know about how big a human falls on a scale like that. So here I'm touching up the lighting on the character, adding a few more details, just fleshing it out, cleaning it up. And at this point it does feel a lot better. The composition feels a little stronger, and I feel like it's expressing the idea that I originally wanted to bring across much better than my first pass at the composition. There's that sense of grandeur, that sense of scale. There's a person to provide that sort of grounding, to relate it back to a human. All the elements that I initially wanted to bring across, working out much better this time. And that's something in your own art that I think you shouldn't shy away from. There's this idea that a lot of beginning artists might have. If they've spent hours and hours on something, then they should spend a few hours more because it's just too painful to trash it. But that's yours. Wasting effort at that point. If something simply isn't working, trust your instincts. Believe what you intuitively feel. Just let it go. Just start again. You'll have a stronger idea. Because at the very least you'll know what didn't work and you won't repeat that. Like here, I've kept the UFO as simple as possible. It's the simplest shape that you can possibly paint to express the idea of a UFO. Simple, flat disc flying in the sky. Because I feel that part of the problem with the initial pass that I did was that I over-designed the UFO. I gave it too many bits and pieces and edges, and it's just too much to look at and understand at a glance, to intuitively grab. So giving the user, the viewer, the simplest possible thing that I can do so that at first blush they get the idea right away. And then as they stare and look across the different elements of the painting, they get a bit more info.